If you agree that some secrets should never have been unearthed, like and subscribe, because what you are about to hear is not the story of an ordinary soldier, but of someone whose very existence was supposed to remain hidden, her past locked behind codes and classifications most people would never know existed. And yet on a routine afternoon, it all came crashing back. Erin Callahan was 28, young enough that recruits mistook her for one of them when she first walked into the training yard, but seasoned enough that the scars across her knuckles and the faint lines around her eyes told another story. The story of someone who had already lived through 2 deployments in landscapes that never made the evening news. Someone who had stared across snowy ridgelines and measured not just distances, but intentions, watching men with rifles melt into forests before NATO patrols could ever catch sight of them. Now she wore the title of instructor, responsible for shaping fresh recruits who carried more bravado than skill, guiding their hands, studying their breathing, trying to turn raw eagerness into controlled precision. The firing range was her sanctuary, a place of routine, steel clanging against lead, echoes rolling back against berms lined with gravel and clay. She walked the line with her clipboard, boots crunching softly, correcting a stance here, tapping a shoulder there, her voice calm and clipped, a metronome of discipline cutting through the haze of cordite. And though outwardly she seemed detached, inside she carried the weight of memory, the taste of cold iron nights in places she wasn't supposed to be, memories that surfaced in dreams she never spoke about. The recruits saw only a steady officer, the one who could split a playing card with a single shot at 200 yards, the one who never flinched when a round cracked too close. They didn't see the woman who still remembered names whispered over radios that went silent too soon. On that afternoon, the sky hung low with clouds, the air heavy with the metallic tang of spent rounds, and the monotony of training settled into her bones. She was adjusting a stubborn target mechanism, tightening bolts that loosened after too many impacts, when the faintest vibration pulsed against her wrist. At first, she thought it was the facility's scheduling ping, an annoying reminder to log completion times. But when she glanced down, brushing a fleck of dust from her comm screen, her breath caught. No tone, no flashing alarm, just a silent line of text glowing cold and deliberate. Snowjackal. Eyes only. Her stomach knotted as the world seemed to narrow, the shouting of recruits fading into a distant hum, the rifle cracks muffled, as if she were suddenly underwater. Snowjackal. She hadn't seen that word in 6 years, not since the night she watched a safe house burn in a winter forest, its flames reflected in ice that refused to melt, not since the night she carried intelligence across a border under cover of snow, while gunfire traced her silhouette. Snowjackal had been a phantom operation, something she wasn't supposed to speak of even in debriefings. It wasn't a unit, not really, more a collection of shadows, operatives selected for missions so deniable that official channels pretended they had never been written. And Erin, barely 22 then, had been pulled into its orbit not because she sought it, but because she had the rare combination of steady nerves, quick thinking, and the kind of loyalty they believed could survive isolation. She had survived it, but barely, and when the mission ended, she swore she'd never answer that call again. But here it was, alive on her comm, bypassing every chain of command she currently answered to. She bent lower over the target stand, feigning a correction while her thumb hesitated over the encrypted access. If anyone looked, they'd see only an officer fixing a jammed mechanism. Inside, her chest pounded with recognition and dread. She tapped the sequence, and the screen unlocked with a wash of green text. Coordinates scrolled past, a location she knew instantly by heart. The northern borders where she once ghosted through pine forests, where adversaries weren't defined by uniforms but by silence and intent. Then came the message. Anomalous activity, satellite signatures consistent with a paramilitary cell thought dissolved. Individuals she had once infiltrated under her Snowjackal cover. The words blurred as adrenaline surged, memories colliding, faces half-lit in safe houses, whispers in coded dialects. A betrayal that nearly ended her career before it began. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself back into the rhythm she taught her recruits. Steady, in through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. But no breathing exercise could erase the reality glowing against her wrist. Snowjackal wasn't dead. It was calling her back. Her mind raced. Why her? Why now? Surely there were younger operatives, sharper, more eager to step into the shadows. But Snowjackal didn't work like that. It never had. It chose those with knowledge others couldn't replicate, with scars that made them uniquely dangerous. She remembered her old handler's words. Once Snowjackal, always Snowjackal, and she had laughed back then, too green to understand what it meant. Now, the echo of those words tasted bitter. She straightened, masking her turmoil behind the practiced neutrality of command, and walked the firing line once more, nodding at a recruit who finally managed a grouping worth noticing. They looked up at her with pride, expecting acknowledgement, and she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Inside, she was already elsewhere, replaying the sequence of events that had last tied her to that codename. She recalled the snow, the silence, the sense of being both predator and prey in a landscape where every tree could hide an enemy. She recalled the coded transmissions, the careful infiltration of men who trusted her just enough to let her near, unaware that every detail she gathered would dismantle them. She recalled the night it all collapsed, the safe house burning because one of them discovered her double life too soon, forcing her to fight her way out under a sky shredded with tracer fire. The scars on her knuckles weren't from training accidents, though that's what she told others. They were from that night, from fists meeting bone in a desperate scramble through fire and snow. And now, 6 years later, the ghosts of that operation had stirred again. The recruits fired another round of volleys, the sound sharp and repetitive, anchoring her momentarily in the present. She corrected their stances, adjusted a grip, barked a reminder about breath control, but her mind was already split, one half rooted in duty to these young soldiers, the other half spiraling into a past she thought she had buried. The message ended with no signature, no instruction beyond a simple directive: await further contact. But the implication was clear. They had chosen her again, and in the quiet chamber of her heart, she knew she would answer. She told herself it was about unfinished business, about ensuring that old threats didn't rise to endanger new lives. But beneath that rationalization pulsed a deeper truth. She had never stopped being Snowjackal. She had just hidden it beneath layers of routine, convincing herself that teaching was enough. The silent alert proved otherwise. As the sun dipped lower, painting the range in muted gold, Aaron stood at the edge of the berm, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon. To her recruits, she looked like an officer measuring their progress. But behind her gaze stretched a battlefield of memory and anticipation. The shadow box of her past had cracked open, and the contents were spilling out whether she wanted them to or not. Snowjackal had returned, and Aaron Callahan, 28 years old, combat veteran, instructor, survivor, felt the cold certainty settle into her bones. The quiet life she had built was already over. Night settled over the range with a silence that only deepened Aaron's unease. The recruits dismissed to barracks, their laughter fading into the hum of fluorescent lights and clattering trays from the mess hall, leaving her alone with the targets she had adjusted and the message still glowing in the back of her mind like a wound she couldn't ignore. And as she gathered her gear with deliberate calm, she felt the weight of choice pressing in on her chest, the weight of knowing that the person she had tried to become, the disciplined instructor, the steady mentor, was about to be shattered by the person she once was, the person called Snowjackal. She walked back to her quarters slowly, boots crunching gravel under the dim watch of sodium lamps. And though to anyone passing by she looked like a soldier ending her day, inside she was already rearranging old instincts, scanning shadows for tails, cataloging escape routes. Because Snowjackal didn't belong in light, Snowjackal belonged to the world that thrived in silence. Her room was Spartan, regulation bed, small desk, neatly folded uniforms, the only personal touch a black and white photograph of her younger brother tucked into the mirror's corner. But even in its simplicity it felt too exposed, too fragile for what she carried now, and she locked the door behind her before activating the secure mode on her comm device, waiting for the next contact. Hours passed with nothing but the hum of the air vent and the distant murmur of barracks life beyond the walls. And for a fleeting moment, she let herself believe the message might have been an error, some glitch in a system long retired. But then, just past midnight, the second alert pulsed, this time slower, heavier, carrying with it not coordinates, but a single line. Report to Echo Point, 0400. Alone. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but from recognition. Echo Point was not on any official map, yet every Snowjackal operative knew it. A secluded ridge outside the perimeter, marked only by a scarred tree with roots like twisted fingers, a place where handlers met their assets when walls couldn't be trusted. She stared at the words until they burned into her, the implications unraveling in threads she couldn't control, because if Echo Point was active again, then so were the ghosts of that winter in Europe, the unfinished battles no one had admitted were still alive. She stripped out of her uniform with ritualistic precision, folding it square, laying it aside, then opened the bottom drawer of her desk where a black case lay hidden beneath stacks of training manuals, untouched for years. Her hand hesitated on the latch, trembling not from weakness but from the gravity of what opening it meant, and when the clasp snapped free, the smell of old leather and oil rose, carrying with it the past she had sealed away. Inside rested her Snowjackal kit, a compact sidearm wrapped in cloth, a field knife etched with faint initials she never explained, a faded patch marked only with a white jackal silhouette against black, and at the bottom, the encrypted drive containing protocols she had sworn she would never need again. She ran her fingers over the patch, the edges frayed from wear, remembering the night it had been pressed into her palm by a handler who told her she'd never be ordinary again, no matter how much she wanted to be. She slipped the sidearm into its holster with the ease of muscle memory, the weight familiar, almost comforting, and tucked the drive into her jacket pocket, then sat on the bed, staring at the photograph of her brother. He had never known what she truly did, only that she served, and she had promised him she was safe now, out of the worst. She whispered an apology into the stillness, though whether it was for him or for herself, she didn't know. At 0345, she left her quarters, moving silent, her boots barely touching gravel, weaving through shadows between buildings until the outer gate loomed ahead, guarded by a pair of sentries who nodded at her with casual recognition. Captain Callahan, always up early, no reason to suspect otherwise. She carried a clipboard under one arm, the perfect disguise for an officer on an inspection, and when the gate buzzed open, she slipped through into the pre-dawn dark, the night air biting at her cheeks. The path to Echo Point was carved through scrub and rock, the kind of terrain where silence felt absolute, and each step drew her further away from the comfort of normalcy and closer to the edge of the world she thought she had left behind. By the time she reached the ridge, the horizon was tinged with the faintest silver, the sky breaking open slowly, and there, leaning against the scarred tree, stood a figure she hadn't seen in 6 years. He was older now, hair thinner at the temples, face cut with deeper lines, but his stance was unchanged, shoulders squared, eyes sharp with that same blend of scrutiny and weariness. Handler Marcus Hale. For a moment neither spoke, the silence between them thick with years of unspoken questions, until he finally said the words that made her chest tighten. Snowjackal, we need you back. He handed her a slim envelope, physical paper, which in itself spoke volumes. Digital lines could be intercepted, but paper was final. She opened it with steady fingers, scanning the terse summary inside. The unit she had once infiltrated, believed dismantled, was resurfacing with new funding, new recruits, and a plan that intelligence couldn't yet decipher, except for one chilling detail. They were active again in the very borderlands where she had last walked among them. Why me? She asked quietly, though the answer was already coiled inside her. Marcus didn't hesitate. Because you know them, because they knew you, and because some debts don't stay buried. His voice carried no apology, no softness, only the inevitability of someone delivering fate rather than choice. He told her she would receive further instructions within 48 hours, that her reactivation was off the books, outside the facility's knowledge, that to everyone else she was still an instructor, but in truth she was once again Snowjackal. She folded the envelope, slid it into her jacket, and turned her gaze to the horizon where the first streaks of dawn painted the sky, her jaw tight with the weight of decision already made. She could have walked away, burned the paper, returned to her recruits, pretended nothing had happened, but she knew herself too well. Erin Callahan had been many things: daughter, sister, officer, mentor. But beneath all that, buried under layers of routine and denial, She was still Snowjackal, forged in snow and fire, shaped by shadows, called not because she wanted to be, but because the world demanded it. She clenched her fists, the scars across her knuckles catching the light, and whispered into the morning air words she hadn't spoken in years. Once Snowjackal, always Snowjackal. The wind carried them away, but the weight remained, and as she walked back down the ridge, the recruits she trained still asleep in their bunks, she knew their world was about to change, though they would never understand why. She would stand before them in daylight, the stern instructor correcting stances and measuring progress. But in the darkness, she would move once more as the phantom they had reawakened, the woman summoned by a silent alert and a name not meant to exist. The following 48 hours felt like living two lives at once, and Aaron Callahan carried them both with the kind of composure that came from years of pretending, years of learning how to lock away one face while wearing another. But inside she was already unraveling the threads of her old identity, stitching them back into her skin where they had never truly vanished. Because Snowjackal was not a name you shed. It was one you carried like a scar, invisible to others but burning every time the world shifted toward violence. By day she drilled her recruits, forcing them through obstacle courses, correcting their aim, barking at their sloppy movements, her tone sharp enough to keep them sweating and guessing. And they saw only the relentless instructor who tolerated no excuses, the officer who demanded perfection. But when the sun dipped low and the barracks lights flickered out, she retreated to her quarters, drawing the blinds tight, unlocking the encrypted drive, and combing through fragmented intelligence files, left for her like breadcrumbs in a digital wilderness. The data painted a picture she didn't want to see. The unit she had once infiltrated, the one that had burned their safe house to the ground, had reformed under a new banner, carrying a new emblem she didn't recognize, but with the same faces she thought she had left buried beneath snow and silence. They called themselves the Pale Wolves now, their activities scattered across borderlands and black markets, their financing drawn from channels intelligence couldn't yet trace, but the tactics were unmistakable. They were hunting something, or someone, and the patterns of movement match what she had once disrupted years ago. The files included grainy satellite captures, trucks weaving through alpine roads, heat signatures clustered in abandoned villages, weapon stockpiles hidden in barns no civilian dared approach. One image froze her. The outline of a man standing beside a truck, blurred but familiar, his height, his posture, the tilt of his head. She whispered his name before she realized it, a name she had sworn never to speak again. Victor. He had been the one who trusted her most when she infiltrated their cell, the one who looked at her with suspicion tempered by reluctant admiration, the one who discovered her betrayal in that final night of fire and snow. She had left him bleeding on the frozen ground, convinced he wouldn't survive the flames, and yet here he was, alive, bleeding. Her stomach twisted, not with guilt exactly, but with the grim recognition that unfinished battles had a way of finding her, no matter how deeply she buried them. At 0300 on the second night, another message appeared, pulsing faintly on her comm. Mission briefing, Hangar 6. 0315. She didn't hesitate. She slipped her sidearm into its holster, tucked the drive back into her jacket, and moved through shadows toward the decommissioned hangar at the edge of the compound. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of rust and oil, and in the far corner Marcus Hale waited, his face drawn tight with urgency. Spread across a metal table were maps, photographs, and dossiers marked with black bars of redaction. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pointed to a cluster of coordinates near the northern border. They've resurfaced here. Weapons trafficking, recruitment, training camps. We've traced shipments of explosives moving through their lines. If they succeed in consolidating, they'll destabilize the entire corridor. We can't afford to let that happen. Erin studied the maps, her eyes narrowing at the terrain she knew too well, the ridges, the forests, the frozen rivers that concealed movement better than any camouflage. "And you want me to go back in?" she said flatly, though it wasn't a question. Marcus's eyes held hers. "Not just you, but you're the linchpin. You know their methods, their leaders. You can anticipate them." He slid a photograph across the table. Victor, his face clearer now, scar cutting across his cheek like an old wound. "He's alive, and he's the reason you're here." The weight of the moment pressed against her chest. Part of her wanted to slam the photo back down, to walk away, to declare herself finished with ghosts that should have stayed buried. But another part of her, the part that had survived betrayal, the part that understood the cost of letting men like Victor grow unchecked, knew she would go, had to go. "What's the op?" she asked, her voice steady. Marcus outlined it quickly. Insertion under cover of darkness, rendezvous with a small covert team, infiltration of a supply route disguised as civilian contractors. She would assume a cover identity again, slipping into shadows as easily as she once had, gathering intelligence, sabotaging their supply lines if possible. "This isn't about elimination," Marcus warned. "It's about disruption. Break them before they can rise." Erin absorbed every detail, her mind already mapping escape routes, contingency plans, the rhythm of risk she had once lived by. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, only nodded when the briefing ended. Marcus placed a hand on the table, his expression unreadable. "This will cost you, Erin. You know that." She met his gaze, her jaw set. "It already has." With that, she gathered the dossier, tucked it into her jacket, and walked out into the pre-dawn chill, the horizon bleeding faint light, her decision sealed. The next day passed like smoke, the recruits oblivious to the storm brewing within their instructor. She barked at them harder than usual, driving them through grueling drills, her eyes sharp and unyielding, but inside her thoughts churned with preparation. Every command, every correction was mechanical, her mind already miles away in frozen forests where silence meant survival. When dusk fell, she retreated again, this time not to her quarters, but to the secure storage where her old gear awaited under layers of dust. She pulled it out piece by piece. Kevlar vest molded to her frame, tactical harness, boots scuffed from past marches. And as she strapped them on, she felt the strange merging of two selves. The instructor who had pretended at normalcy, and the phantom who had always been waiting in the shadows. Snowjackal was not a mask she wore, it was her skin. At 2200, she boarded an unmarked transport at the airstrip beyond the compound, slipping into the belly of the aircraft with a small team she didn't know. Their faces were stern, unreadable, and no one spoke. That was how it always began, with silence. The engines roared, the aircraft lifted into night, and Erin sat with her back straight, eyes closed, centering herself in the rhythm of breath and memory. Hours later, the ramp lowered, icy wind slashing through, and she dropped into darkness, parachute blooming above her like a silent ghost. She landed hard on frozen soil, the weight of her gear anchoring her, and she rolled, rising quickly, scanning the tree line. Around her, the others touched down, their movements efficient, but Erin felt the forest claim her in a way it hadn't in years, the crunch of snow underfoot, the sharp bite of cold air in her lungs, familiar, almost comforting. They moved in silence through the night, navigating by faint red lights and whispered coordinates, until the glow of an abandoned village flickered in the distance, fires burning in steel drums, figures moving like shadows against crumbling walls. Erin crouched low, her eyes narrowing on the silhouettes. The pale wolves, her past, alive before her. She adjusted her scope, breath steady, eyes locking on Victor. He stood taller than the rest, commanding, his scar catching the firelight, his presence magnetic even from a distance. A surge of memory washed over her. The night he discovered her betrayal, the look in his eyes when he realized who she truly was, the fury, the pain. She clenched her jaw, steadying herself. This was not about ghosts. This was about preventing what was to come. The team leaders signaled the next move, flank, observe, report. But Erin's pulse hammered with a different rhythm, one that told her this was only the beginning, that Victor's survival meant more than intelligence could yet predict, that the game she thought she had ended years ago was only now beginning anew. As the team melted deeper into shadow, Erin whispered into the cold air words only she could hear. "Snowjackal's back."